Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today, diving deep into segregation in the U.S. It's a topic that sadly feels incredibly relevant even now.
It does.
You sent over a podcast episode titled Jim Crow and Segregation, the Legalization of Racial Inequality. And wow,
Yeah,
there's so much to unpack there.
there really is. And it's,
Where do we even begin?
well, maybe start with the term Jim Crow itself. It's actually, it comes from this minstrel show caricature, which just shows you how deep this goes.
Right, yeah, like how ingrained in the culture it was.
Exactly. It wasn't just about keeping people separate. It was about power and control.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's dig into that system.
Mm.
The podcast episode starts with Reconstruction.
Mm.
After the Civil War, there was this sense of hope, right?
Right.
We had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, all aimed at giving Black Americans equal rights.
Right. Seemed like a turning point.
It did.
Right.
But then, as the episode points out, that progress gets completely, it's just undermined so quickly.
Yeah, the Compromise of 1877, basically they pull federal troops out of the South.
So Black communities are just left vulnerable.
Vulnerable. And, yeah, and then you have groups like the Ku Klux Klan rising up using violence and intimidation.
It's like a betrayal of everything Reconstruction was supposed to be.
It is. It really is.
And then these Jim Crow laws, they start popping up all over the South.
Systematically segregating every aspect of life.
It wasn't just schools or buses. It was parks, cemeteries.
Water fountains.
Like everything.
Imagine you're
Oh.
thirsty on a hot day. You can't even get a drink from the same fountain as someone else.
Just because of your skin color.
It's dehumanizing.
It is. And the podcast gave this example of the Separate Car Act in Louisiana.
1890.
You can't even ride in the same train car.
Yeah.
It's just so stark how the law was used to enforce this idea that Black people were inferior.
Right.
Which leads us to Plessy v. Ferguson.
Yeah. 1896, big turning point.
This podcast does such a good job of setting the scene. Homer Plessy. He was mixed race, but could pass as white. And he sits in the whites-only train car.
Deliberately, it was a planned act of defiance.
Orchestrated by this group, the Citizens Committee. They wanted to challenge the whole idea of segregation.
Smart strategy.
It was. But it backfired. The Supreme Court ruled against Plessy.
And we get separate but equal.
The logic was that separation didn't mean inferiority.
Right. But the reality, look at the schools. Black schools. Crumbling buildings, outdated textbooks, underpaid teachers.
And white schools had the best of everything.
Separate and unequal. By design.
And you know what's crazy? This separate but equal idea, it's still relevant today.
How so?
Well, think about school funding. A lot of it comes from property taxes. So wealthier neighborhoods, which are often predominantly white, their schools have more resources.
Better facilities, higher paid teachers.
And schools in poorer neighborhoods, which are often predominantly Black or Hispanic, they're left behind.
It's a different form of segregation.
But the consequences are the same.
And this episode reminds us the impact of segregation. It wasn't just in the South.
Yeah, even without those explicit Jim Crow laws, the North had its own forms of racial division.
More subtle, but just as damaging.
It's like segregation was woven into the fabric of society.
Absolutely. Think about things like redlining,
Where banks would refuse to give loans to Black families.
keeping them out of certain neighborhoods.
Redlining might be illegal now, but the impact it's still felt today.
It created these racially segregated neighborhoods,
Concentrated poverty.
fueled the racial wealth gap.
Generations denied the opportunity to build wealth just because of their race.
It's a long-lasting consequence.
It is. And it wasn't just housing. The episode talks about employment discrimination, too.
Trapping Black Americans in low-wage jobs.
Limiting their opportunity.
And the psychological toll.
Constantly being told you're not good enough.
Not worthy.
Just because of your skin color.
The scars run deep.
So we see how segregation, whether it was Jim Crow or these more subtle forms, created this web of disadvantages.
Absolutely.
It denied Black Americans equal opportunities and treated them as second-class citizens.
And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth. The past isn't really past. It's shaping our present right now. The way we live, work, interact.
It's all connected.
It is.
It's like this system was designed to keep Black Americans down. And the episode makes this connection to mass incarceration.
Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow.
It's so powerful how she argues that mass incarceration is basically a new form of racial caste system.
It is targeting Black Americans, continuing that cycle of poverty and marginalization.
And she connects all these policies, like the war on drugs,
Mandatory minimum sentencing for drug offenses.
Creating a system that feels like an echo of Jim Crow.
Think about it. Back then, Black people were denied the right to vote,
Poll taxes and literacy tests.
even after they've served their time. And who makes up a huge part of the incarcerated population?
It's like we've just replaced the old systems of control with new ones.
Subtler, but just as effective.
And what gets me is how mass incarceration just rips families apart.
Communities, too.
Children growing up without a parent, families struggling.
Yeah.
It just creates more poverty and instability.
And it's not just the individuals, it's the impact on everyone around them.
Yeah.
And this episode, it brings up implicit bias.
Those unconscious prejudices
How they can contribute to racial disparities.
in policing, sentencing.
Even just everyday life.
It's hard to confront those biases in ourselves.
It is. But we have to if we want to understand these systems.
And how we might be part of the problem without even realizing it.
And that's where those different schools of thought on segregation come in.
Right. The episode mentioned them earlier.
Each one gives us a different way of looking at this history,
Like the traditionalist view
emphasizing white supremacy,
and then the progressive perspective.
looking at social and economic factors,
Right. Critical race theory.
the legal and institutional framework.
It's not just about individual racism. It's about how it's built into our laws and policies.
Exactly.
And then there's social history.
Focusing on the experiences of Black people,
They're resilient.
their fight for equality.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle.
Each piece adds more to the picture.
And that's so important. Because understanding segregation isn't just about looking back.
It's about addressing the injustice that's still happening today.
So what are we doing now to dismantle these systems, to create a more just society?
Big question.
This episode doesn't give easy answers.
But it does point us in some directions.
Like education,
understanding the root causes,
the power of activism.
speaking out against injustice.
And this episode brought up Ida B. Wells.
The journalist who exposed lynching,
She faced so much danger. Threats, violence.
but she knew she had to tell the truth.
Her work helped change public opinion.
And it laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement,
It's a reminder that speaking up matters.
even when it's hard.
And the episode also talks about collective action,
Like the NAACP.
their legal battles against Jim Crow.
It was a long fight,
But they were persistent.
and they won some major victories.
It shows us that change takes time.
And the effort of many.
And we can all contribute in different ways.
Supporting organizations fighting for justice,
Voting for the right candidates.
even where we spend our money.
It all makes a difference.
It does.
What's so powerful about this episode is how it connects the past to the present.
We see those echoes of Jim Crow everywhere.
Mass incarceration, the racial wealth gap.
Disparities in education, healthcare, housing.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But it's important to recognize the progress we've made, too.
Right.
We're having this conversation. We're grappling with these issues.
That's a sign of hope.
There's a growing awareness.
It feels like we're at a turning point. We've been through a lot, haven't we? From
Yeah.
Jim Crow to the North and all these systems in place.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah.
But, I think what this episode really drives home is that awareness is key.
Yeah, like you can't fix what you don't see, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to understand how segregation worked, how it showed up in different ways.
And how it still affects us now. But okay, so we get it. We see
Yeah.
the problem. Now what? Where do we go from here?
Well, the episode talks about education.
Right.
And I don't just mean school. I mean like a commitment to constantly learning and unlearning.
Yeah, seeking out different perspectives
Challenging those narratives that just keep racism going,
and having those conversations about race.
even when they're hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? This episode brought up Ida B. Wells.
Oh, yeah. Incredible woman.
She was a journalist, and she exposed lynching.
Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
It was dangerous work.
Oh, incredibly. She faced threats, violence.
She was even exiled,
But she knew the truth had to be told.
and she helped change how people thought about it.
Laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement.
It's like it shows us that speaking up, it matters.
Even when it feels impossible.
And this episode also talks about doing things together.
Collective action.
Right, like the NAACP and their legal battles against Jim Crow,
Years of fighting.
but they chipped away at it.
Slowly but surely.
It's a reminder that change can be slow.
It takes time and a lot of people working together
And we can all do something.
in our own way.
Support the right organizations.
Vote for candidates who actually care about justice.
Even think about where we're spending our money.
It all adds up.
It does.
Yeah.
And what I think is so so powerful about this episode is how it connects all of this to what's happening now.
Yeah, we see those echoes of Jim Crow.
In the prisons, the wealth gap.
Education, healthcare, it's still there.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but we also have to see the progress.
Yeah.
I mean, we're having this conversation.
We are.
More and more people are waking up to this reality.
And that gives me hope.
Me too.
Yeah.
It feels like we're at a turning point.
I think so. This deep dive, it's been heavy, but it's shown us a way forward.
It has. We have to understand, we have to speak out, and we have to work together.
So what will you do? What will you do with all of this? How will you challenge racism?
It's on all of us.
It is. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.